Hello and welcome to Carnivorist Chats. My name is James, your host. I started this podcast to help other folks share their own healing stories and to interview thought leaders and experts in the carnivore, keto, and low oxalate space. Before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to Equip Foods and the Carnivore Bar. As an affiliate, you can use the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products when you check out using the code Carnivorist. Thanks in advance for listening, subscribing, and any likes or shares. And now, on with the podcast.
Guys, it's such an honor to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio for the millionth combined time, I believe.
No, this is great. Thank you. It's fun to do it all together.
Casey, this is awesome. And what an amazing opportunity. And it's so great to see Lierre again. And of course, yourself. This is great. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I am as well. I do have to give you credit, James, for this episode because you came up with this. As much as I'd like to take credit for it, it was actually your idea. We're going to give you a short introduction onto the show. Although we shouldn't need to do that since we've had you on 17 times, like I said earlier. James Lehman is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out James's first appearances in episode 355 and 595 of Boundless Body Radio. We also hosted him recently to review the 2024 Hack Your Health Conference. James Lehman is a 51-year-old who was born, lives, and works in the beautiful island of Bermuda. As a vegetarian and vegan, James's health declined so much that he had multiple hospitalizations, autoimmune issues, anxiety and depression, amongst many other health problems. From listening to podcasts, reading books, and discovering the keto and carnivore diets, James has regained his health and through that process found happiness and purpose in sharing his experiences. You can find James on his Instagram page at @the_carnivorist and his fantastically successful podcast at the aptly named The Carnivorist Chats. James Lehman, always such an honor to welcome you to the show.
Casey, I tell you, every time you read it out, man, I get I think my head's going to be too big for this screen, but it's such an honor to be here on the show on Boundless Body and be a return guest. And like I said, alongside Lierre, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, such an honor to have you. Let's get Lierre introduced as well. Lierre Keith is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out her first appearance on episode 67 of Boundless Body Radio. That episode has been one of our most downloaded and talked about episodes of all time. She was also hosted on episodes 287 and 447. So be sure to check out all of those episodes to discover Lierre's journey to malnutrition through veganism. Lierre is an American writer, radical feminist, food activist, and environmentalist. Her nonfiction works include the highly acclaimed The Vegetarian Myth, Food, Justice, and Sustainability, which was absolutely life-changing for me and also for James. She is the co-author, along with Derek Jensen and Eric McBay, of Deep Green Resistance, Strategy to Save the Planet, and she's the editor of the Derek Jensen Reader, Writings on the Environmental Revolution. She currently lives in Northern California with her amazing dogs, Lierre Keith. Welcome back to Boundless Body Radio.
I don't think I remembered that we had done it 3 times. So gosh, we've talked a lot.
We have talked a lot. Yeah.
We have. Okay.
We have talked a lot, and I still want to get you back on for another one because I feel like, have done flybys of your book, but there's still so much in your book to cover that we haven't yet. And I have to tell you, it was one of those books that I still remember exactly where I was in the car listening to it for the first time. I was in California. I was driving from San Diego to LA, and some of the concepts you talk about in your book, James has it right there, were blowing my mind at the time.
Oh.
It was such a wonderful book and a highly influential book in my life. And I know I'm speaking for James as well. So thank you so much for your book.
Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree 150%. Lierre, what a transformational book. I was sad to say to you in person that I found it after, I was in my despair, but it made so many things make sense for me. And we're going to get into some of those things today. And I just appreciated you so much for having the courage and the voice and the aptitude to be able to put something together like that so succinctly describes what happened to us and why it happened, because there's so many people out there, as we know, questioning. And I concur with Casey. Your episode that you and I did together is my most watched, most downloaded, and by far in the thousands of magnitude. So I really appreciated you, and I hope to have you back on in my own podcast at some point too.
Well, thank you. No, I'm always happy to come back on and talk some more, because gosh, there's so much to say about this topic. There really is. And I think all 3 of us know that you can potentially save a life with this information. That they really have no idea how much harm they're doing until often it's too late. So
Well, Lierre, I told you off air that I recently got to hang out with James, and I can confirm I saw his notebook where he takes notes for all of his episodes. His notebook is full, too full pages of notes for your episode in particular, with like a third of one page crossed out. Like, you guys have a lot more to go, I'm sure, but like, just to think that I somewhat prepare for episodes is like not even on the same like universe as the way James prepares for his episodes. So he really takes it seriously, and I can confirm that, yeah, he has a lot of really great notes for your episode together, which I love.
Well, thank you. It's a lot of work doing podcasts, and I just really appreciate all the people in the background who do that, because when you just, like, you can tell when you're invited on one of these shows and they don't even know who you are, like what it just, I mean, you still can fill in a lot of information, but when somebody has actually read the book, or at least some of it, enough to have some concept of what's the universe that we're entering here? What's your framework? Like, what's the questions? It just goes so much better. You can just get so much more information to the public. So I know how much work it is, and I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. James, this episode was your idea. So why didn't you tell the listener what you and I talked about at dinner, and why you decided that we should kind of set this up?
Yeah, absolutely. There was, as we said, there's so many things to unpack, but Lierre's episode and my episode we did together specifically, and I know it's probably exactly the same for you, Casey, besides being one of the most listened to, downloaded, etc., has been the one unequivocally that have had the most people reach out to me, i.e. vegans have found it and are coming to me to say, James, I heard your story with Lierre. I bought The Vegetarian Myth. I'm starting to read it. It's starting to make sense. I'm not understanding how I get to this place. And what I wanted to do was just, again, tell our own stories about how we got into veganism in a succinct as manner as possible, but also how we found our way through the minefield and some of the major arguments that are there. We've talked about it before, but some of the main things, and you hear coming out of the vegan space now, are plants sentient, and they don't have nervous systems, and what happened to our bodies. I wanted to delve a little bit more into actually some of the nutritional stuff. Specifically, Lierre and I shared that lowering of stomach acidity and betaine HCl that I talked to you about. But what a great way to have Lierre's expertise, my experience as a much shorter term vegan, but to just discuss all of this in one podcast where people can just sort of go, okay, here we go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I love that. Let's start with you, Lierre. Obviously, as James said, we've heard your story in its entirety before, but let's review and recap. And I would love, as each one of you are telling your stories, if you could give a few examples of how truly committed you were to the vegan diet, like a few stories of like, were they really vegan, or were they kind of like fringy vegetarian or vegan on weekdays, and then on the weekends they do something different? Like, if you could give us a few examples of things to demonstrate how actually committed you were to the diet and the lifestyle.
Okay, no, that's good. So I became a vegan when I was 16, and I did it. I got into it in the way that the majority of people do, which is that I knew somebody who was a vegan, and I was convinced. So I met another teenage girl and her whole family. They were really into being vegan. And this was really early. I mean, it was like 1980, 1981, something like that. And it was, I'd never heard of it before. I had certainly heard of vegetarians, but I hadn't heard of vegan before. So, and we didn't have social media back then. So, I mean, there was no way I was going to bump into that. But there she was. And it took about 2 weeks, but I was completely on by the time she was done with me. Yeah, and I think that I was somebody that was prone to this sort of thing. And when I say that, I don't mean that even in a bad way. I just mean had my whole life, had been very concerned and impassioned about the state of the world and the way we treated animals and all kinds of injustice. And so, in comes somebody who hands you this very neat package that says, if you do this one thing, you can fix all these problems. You can save the world, and you can save the animals, and you can feed all the hungry children, and they'll make all this human justice as well. And we weren't really talking about climate change back then, but now, of course, it's, oh yeah, cows are wrecking the climate, so you don't want to do that. And also your health, you will save your health. So all of those things spoke to me very deeply, and I just climbed on board. So that was it. I was on. And one of the problems with being a vegan, as I think most people can attest to, is that it's never just what you eat, it becomes who you are. And this is one of the main problems. It makes it very hard to get out of, because it's this really cult-like mentality. And I'm not saying it's an out-and-out cult. I would never go that far. That's silly. But it has some very cult-like elements to it. And so when you can't engage with outside information without feeling threatened, that is a sign of a fundamentalist mindset. You have entered cult territory at this point. And that's what it was like, because I kept bumping into all kinds of other information that contradicted the vegan message, and I couldn't deal with it. So I spent 20 years, I say, like, I wrestled with this angel, and I did, because of course I didn't stop wanting to understand what had gone so wrong on our planet. Why were we destroying everything? We've got this one planet. You would point out one is a very small number. And we were destroying it. And why? And even, as young as 1920, I already had people that I respected explain this to me, like professor in college say, the moment you put a plow to soil, you destroy that soil. And it was like all the dominoes fell in my mind. But what then? It was like, this was supposed to be the best thing. This was how we were going to save the world. It can't really be the way we're destroying the world. So it was like this constant back and forth of like facing the truth about what agriculture was and where all this like supposedly peaceful and animal loving food, where it all came from. And then that would, really conflict with my vegan belief that this was the best thing and this was the way we were going to save everything and everybody. So and then I tried to grow my own food later. I was like, well, that's the thing you're supposed to do is, zero carbon footprint. Let's grow the food. And it was impossible without killing animals. There were dead animals in every bite. And it was near impossible for me to like ride that line still. So those were some of the contradictions that I just kept bumping up against in books, in my actual experience. And it was really hard. The day that it was all over for me, it was that part of it was the relief. Was like, all right, at least I can stop fighting what I think I already know, and actually start to engage with all this information that I've accumulated and all these books that I've read and rejected because I just cognitive dissonance. We have a phrase for this, and that's what you live with. Unless you completely close down, which, is a thing people do in all kinds of realms in their lives. I get it. It's something we're prone to, but I didn't want to be that person. Like I wanted to be engaged with the world and I wanted to be intellectually curious and I wanted to read all the books and I still wanted to find out the truth. So, at the end of the day, it was, it had to collapse on me before I could really do it. But anyway, and then I wrecked my health. So I know, James has his story too, but I ended up with, yes, the gastroparesis with my stomach. I stopped menstruating, pretty much destroyed my reproductive organs, horrendous blood sugar issues, of course, which my insulin receptors are gone. I know some people can repair them over time. You can resensitize. It was it's never coming back. So I just live with that. Worst thing was my spine's degenerating. I have degenerative disc disease at 4 levels. So that's pretty bad. And I have been able to repair some with this diet, which is not supposed to happen. But eating a more appropriate human diet at least took down some of the pain, the inflammation, certainly. So I'm certainly in less pain now than I was at the end of my vegan life. The depression, the anxiety, the skin so dry, it's bleeding at night, and you can't sleep because it hurts. All of that too. So, and the autoimmunity. I have 3 autoimmune diseases. So that's, I guess, my story in a nutshell. Let's hear from James.
Thanks, Lierre. And it just amazes me every time I hear your story and to think of the similarities, in our journey. And yours was much longer. And I give you credit for sticking it out as long as you did, because mine was 6 years. And by the 5th year, my health really went off the cliff. So I started my journey as a vegetarian / pescatarian because I was dating a young lady who was vegetarian in university. And as you know, in university, we don't have a lot of spending money, and what you do is you kind of, when you're dating someone, you eat the same foods and you speak to them, obviously, and talk to them, and which was very commendable of her back in the early 90s and late 90s to have that, because there wasn't a lot of vegetarian options even back then to eat, but she made us the food. We did have eggs. When I came back to Bermuda, that stayed with me. I never ate beef, turkey, pork, those things, but I did include being on an island, the fresh fish here, off and on throughout my vegetarian phase, which was for decades. The unfortunate part was I was back from university. I got into the rat race, the 9 to 5 world, which turned out to be a lot longer, the hours. So I ended up putting on a lot of weight. I was eating a lot of processed vegetarian foods and flours. My health was not the best. I definitely could notice a lot of health issues. I ended up collapsing at home one day. I had a week hospital stay where they couldn't figure out what was going on. Then come to find out I had a severe viral infection, Epstein-Barr, and ended up thinking to myself, well, I've got to kind of save my health here. What are the next stages? And that's when the vegan really propaganda piece was in full swing, especially the documentaries. That was in 2014-ish about. So think things like Cowspiracy, Game Changers. I came across those, and let's face it, they are very compelling films when you're going into it, because they're, like you said, they are tackling these issues where I had already had the seeds planted of better for the planet, better for your health, and certainly better for the animals. And we'll make this clear. All three of us on this conversation today are not in favor of factory farming. So just putting that out there. And the videos are very compelling. And I felt right then and there, right, I'm going to do it. I'm going full vegan. And I can assure you, and I've told Casey, that I did not cheat once during my 6 years. And I put my hand on my heart and swear to whomever, whatever you believe in, that I did not. I really did not. And for the first little while, for the first 2 years, my health improved. Think me eliminating a lot of processed foods. Think me losing weight. Think me going, well, this is good. I'm going to add exercise back in. And it went pretty well for the first little while. And now looking back in hindsight, which they say is 2020, but I lost my vision. So that's kind of ironic there. I should have noticed the things that were starting to happen to me. The brain fog was creeping in. I was forgetting what I was thinking about at work. I'd be on the keyboard typing. I had severe arthritis to the point I was wearing braces on my wrist. I was losing weight no matter what I was stuffing in my mouth. I was bleeding from my bowels constantly. I was going to the doctor. I felt like a human pincushion. Folks have heard my story before, but I really wanted to hone in how dangerous this can be in the nutritional side, because I was hammering on and I kept going back to saying, this is the best diet. This is the best diet for your health. So I needed to vegan harder. I needed to do juice cleanse, almost raw foods at some point. I tried everything. I ate a whole foods, plant-based diet, very healthy. I tried to supplement where I could. I was supplementing B12. Of course, it had to be vegan B12. Sources, and it still did not help. And it culminated with me being 127 pounds, basically bedridden. I lost my job because I couldn't perform the daily duties of my job, bleeding from my bowels. The pandemic hit and I was stuck. Casey knows the next part of this story. It can become quite emotional for me even today, and speaking in front of you. I was at rock bottom. I prayed nightly to be taken out of my misery. My skin was cracking. My teeth were bleeding constantly. My hair was falling out on my head, all over my body. I had no libido at the time. That had left me. I was unable to have children if I wanted to because my sperm count was so low. So basically, an anxiety and depression had fully taken a hold. And then, of course, Casey knows the story. I got advised to listen to some podcasts and go online, and just because I couldn't get out of bed. And I came across my angel, who is Sally Norton, and her work. And I discovered oxalates. And what had happened was I was in total disbelief. I found her presentation online by happenstance and by absolute miracle, called Lost Seasonality and the Overconsumption of Plants. And it's on YouTube to this day, and I encourage people to go check it out. And of course, it's about us overconsuming plants, agriculture taking hold, and us losing that knowledge base of ancestral wisdom and just going directly to the agricultural system. And then, of course, the oxalate plant defense chemicals, which you also know about, Lierre and lectins and things like that. And I could not fathom that plants were defending themselves. So it was a huge, I must have watched it 4 times. And in my brain fog state, it finally started to click. And it was right then and there that I decided I have got to add some animal protein back in my diet. And I remember being in tears and saying, I've got to do something here. My family was worried about me. I had friends stopping me thinking that I was dying. I really was dying. Like I had something more insidious, but I mean, I'm just listening to that. There's enough insidious things going on. I literally was dying on the inside and outside. And it was that moment that changed everything for me. And yeah, that's my story. And I'll put a pause in there for Casey to speak now.
I've asked both of you this question before. Lierre, you mentioned cognitive dissonance. And I think of cognitive dissonance as what you believe and what you do are not jiving with each other. That's kind of the way I think about that. And I wonder, how difficult is it when you know the diet you're on is already the best diet? How do you get off of the very best and very healthiest diet? That to me is that would be so challenging.
Yeah, it was really hard. That's why it took me 20 years to work it out. Because I started falling apart pretty quickly. The blood sugar issues were almost instantaneous for me. but I didn't have words for it. It would be a long time before I'd stumble onto like Michael Eads and Dr. Mary Dan and Michael Eads and their Protein Power series, and also the original Atkins books actually were incredibly helpful to me. But I didn't know that then, you know, and it was like 1982, 1983, like, and I was 16, 17 years old. Like, what did I know? I just knew that if I didn't put food in my mouth, it felt like I was dying, which of course you are, because it's, you know, our brains can only survive under like a really narrow range of blood sugar. And it's too high when you're eating this nothing but carbohydrate. Essentially, you're just popping it way up. And then, of course, insulin comes to the rescue, and it's a very blunt instrument. And so it knocks it back down, but way too low. And that's the blood sugar moment where you're shaking and crying, and you have to put food in your mouth. And that started happening to me right away, like 2-3 months in. I was already getting these terrible blood sugar episodes, and I didn't know what was wrong. And I don't know, it never crossed my mind it was the diet, because it couldn't be the diet. You can't have that thought. Like once you're in, that's it. You can't question it. It's just psychologically impossible, because you've thrown all in with this kind of ideology, and then it took me 20 years to back out. Like, and I hear your story, James. Like, I did some really serious damage to myself before I was willing to pull out. And it is really, really hard. You know, almost on a daily basis, I get emails from people who they themselves have some history with this, but now they're seeing a friend or a family member, and they're trying to be vegan and they're falling to pieces. And what can I do to get them out? And I'm like, this is really hard. It's like anything else. You can give them information. You can't come on too hard, or they're just gonna, react. They're just gonna pull away. And you don't want to wreck the relationship. You want to keep the lines of communication open, right? But you want to give them enough information that when they're ready for it, it's there. And they'll be like, all right, what was that thing that, my aunt said? What was that thing that my friends, what? And then they'll come and they'll ask, or they'll do a Google search, and maybe they'll start to find some better information. But until they're ready, you can't. You're dragging somebody kicking and screaming out of a cult, and it doesn't work. So that is a really hard thing. So you just surround them with love, keep the communication open, drop little bits of information when you can. Don't be obnoxious, because they're just going to pull away, and you have to wait. And for a lot of us, it's sad to say, waiting means waiting until they've done permanent harm. It's not until they're really suffering that they're going to be willing to look at it. And that's really hard. Now, there are people who get it a lot quicker, because I've had that conversation too of, oh yeah, I was a vegan for 3 months. Ha ha ha. I felt like such crap. That was ridiculous. And I ate a burger and I felt great. And that was it. They never looked back. And I'm amazed at those people. Like, how did that, like, wow, that just didn't get in your brain the way it did into mine, because I was not letting go. So, more power to them for not becoming such fanatics. But I mean, I just have to say, in defense of the fanatics, we're the only people who really change the world. So you do need some humans to be fanatics, but we do need to be reined in as well. I know that we can cause all kinds of trouble too. So it's a double-edged thing. I know that. But like, that single-pointed focus is often needed to make real change in the world. So anyway, I don't know. It's hard. It's like a little bit. You just give them a little bit, and then hopefully they come out on their own. But you are waiting for them to really hurt themselves for a lot of them.
Yeah, absolutely, Lierre. And two things that I forgot to mention. Number one, my mom has always been a vegetarian since I was born. So you can imagine, sadly, her health is falling off a cliff now in her older age. And I firmly believe it's because of it. And I finally, speaking to what you're just talking about, have been, since I recovered my health, and she's seen me, the dramatic change going from 127 pounds of looking like a skeleton to now over 185 of musculature on my frame again, is starting to ask questions. And I just this past week gave her Sally Norton's book, said, Mom, just read this. I'm going to give her yours, but I wanted her to just come at it from the dietary angle, not too, involved yet. And she's committed to me. She said to me this morning, I promise I'm going to read it. And I said, oh, good, I have more for you. So that's a little bit of that there. And the other thing, Casey, that I didn't often get a chance to talk about on my journey was, yes, the cognitive dissonance was real. And we can talk about Lierre and I's first bite when we added animal products back in. Mine was fish, it was salmon. But Lierre, you're going to smile at this one. I went to see a nutritionist when I was so sick that I remember wearing my mask and going into her office during the height of COVID. And I sat there and I said, Right. She could see me. I literally, she drew blood on me that day. She had the office and I passed out, completely cold, passed out. I mean, my blood pressure was low. My insulin was, I was pre-diabetic for sure. Everything was awful. And when I finally came to, she said, well, I have something to tell you. I said, what's that? I don't work with vegans. I went, pardon? She said, yeah, unless you're willing to change and add some animal products back in your diet, I refuse now to work with vegans. And I very rarely get the chance to thank her because it was that moment. I couldn't believe it. I said, well, what does that mean? She says, well, unless you're willing to change, I won't do it. And I went away in a huff and a puff that day and said, well, that's fine. I'll find somebody else. And then I went home, Can Plants Harm You, Sally Norton, and the rest is history. But I don't often get a chance to talk about her because it was her hesitance, reluctance, obstinance to say that to me that really went, oh man. And this was my last, you have to understand, this was my last stop at the OK Corral here. I was like, I had tried everything else, veganing harder, doubling down, juicing, and this was it. I was in such a bad shape. And so to have that happen was incredible. But yeah, it's amazing. And as you say, people have to be at the stage to hear and to listen. And you just have to wait for that. And when it happens, the miracles start to happen.
Yeah, the really hard ones for me is when there's children involved. And I've seen marriages break up over this, where one half of the marriage is realizing like this vegan thing is killing us and I'm going to start eating meat. And then the other half is like, no, this is from the devil. You can't eat meat. It's the worst thing ever. And like literally the marriage, a year later, the marriage is broken up and now they have joint custody. So when the kids are with mom, they're eating vegan whatever cereal for breakfast. And then, dad has them on the weekends and is like trying to get them to eat as much meat as they can, like over the weekend. And I don't mean to laugh. It's horrible because, then I get the report back of how poorly the kids are doing. And that's like was one of the things that, gets the one parent to wake up is like, our kids are not thriving. They're too small. They're skinny. They've got all these like weird cognitive problems. They can't concentrate, ADHD. This is an ADHD. They just don't have any fat in their diets. Of course, their brains can't work. The kids are insomniac, like crazy stuff. The worst story I ever heard was a 4-year-old girl of a vegan. She was already had her first menstrual period at age 4, and that's the soy.
Wow.
And it was horrible. You want to talk about precocious puberty, and that was what finally woke her up to it. But she worked for an animal rights organization, so she honestly was in a cult because everybody in her workplace, it was horrendous. Like, and she had watched them trash other people over and over, like on social media. Like anybody who started to question anything about veganism was just taken down, and she was terrified because she had realized. And she also went back into the notes, like her daughter's pediatric notes from the doctor, and the doctor had said to her repeatedly, "Do not give your child soy. Please, dear God, don't do this." And she kept saying, "No, it's the wonderful food of health and life and compassion, and like all the good is from the soy. And of course, I'm going to give my daughter soy milk." And then she saw what happened. And that was when she reached out to me. But I mean, the story there is like there's many, many layers of how horrible it was for her. And I lost touch with her eventually, but she was terrified. Like, have I done permanent damage to this child? And I was like, I can't tell you one way or the other. I don't know. I do know that children are resilient. They're still building. So, if you start right now, giving her plenty of butter, who knows? But, you've got to, and also her own blood work was terrible. I mean, she had no minerals at all, like left in her body. I'm like, I can explain that to you. This is what happens when you eat nothing but carbohydrate, just not nutrient dense enough for the human body. But terrible stories about the children. And there's still not much you can do because it's not like you can go up to people in the grocery store. Don't put that in your cart. Like that's so obnoxious. And I hate seeing it. There's this like the 2 kids and the parents, and they've got the soy milk loaded up in their cart, and there's nothing you can do in that moment. It's like all we can do is surround these people with better information. All the invitation we can think of is to just look at this, just please think about this, in the most non-obnoxious way that we can, where you just think about it, whatever it is in is what little openings you may have about this. But it is hard because that is so permanent when it's children. You really only get one chance to build a body and a brain. And all the research I've got an entire file on the kids, and it's bad. They get rickets. They have all kinds of damaged sight and hearing and out and out brain damage where they're going to be mentally retarded forever. The B12, especially for that. it is like just really grim. And I mean, all we can do is just keep trying to get the information out as best we can. But those are the ones that break my heart.
And Casey, just to tack on to Lierre's point very quickly, is that, for me, that definitely the kids are the most sad, but the second most, and I think you'll agree, Casey, are the severe mental issues that people end up with, anxiety, depression. Lierre and I both have it. I had to go back and apologize to so many people
Yes,
that I came across, that I was so short with, let's say, because I was high strung, anxious, depressed, and I just go back and I go, I'm so sorry. That wasn't really me. But you and I have seen so many miraculous turnarounds of people with schizophrenic disorder, severe anxiety, depression. And I was thinking just now about the other sad story as well, is Giselle Bisson, we've both interviewed, Casey, and she lost a few of her friends that when she was the recovering vegan on Instagram, for those folks that don't know, a few of her friends sadly to suicide that were vegan. And she looks back at it now and could see it coming on. And it's so sad, so sad.
It is very tragic. James, you mentioned the first bite, and I love hearing these stories of like everything around that first bite of food. There's so many similarities to the stories that I've heard, but maybe you can start by telling us about that first bite, what that was like for you. Do also have to point out Lierre's adorable and massive dog is making an appearance on the show. If you're listening and not watching, you're missing out on a very adorable dog moment. Love it. James, Can you tell us about the first bite, that moment?
Yeah, absolutely, Casey. I mean, you have to understand that the dissonance was real, as Lierre said. It was hard. I literally must have had a few episodes where I went and got some animal products, put them in my fridge, and didn't touch them, and ended up throwing them in the garbage. I hate to say I was wasteful, because like, no, I can't do it. But then I was like, the realization hit that this was going to be the way for me. This was going to be my way back to health. And for me, I chose fish because it was most closely to what I had eaten as a pescatarian in my last days of vegetarian/pescatarianism. And I chose salmon. And I never forget it to this day. It was COVID. I had bought a little outside grill, and I got a salmon, a lovely wild-caught salmon steak, and grilled it up and sat there. And I was sitting there going, all right, here goes. And I went for it. And admittedly, not right away, but certainly after I had eaten a whole piece of salmon and I had sat down and I was going, okay, the brain fog started to lift. Is almost like the curtains drew back and the sun shone in a little bit. I was like, my body, I could literally feel my body going, thank you. Thank you. And I should have listened to my body more in those last months or two, because I literally would go into the cupboard and eat a whole jar of coconut manna just for the fat, and I would down the whole jar. But no, that couldn't have been the diet, right? But yeah, that first bite, epic. And then the rest is history. I was so excited to finally start having that incessant, unrelenting brain fog lift that it was just such a joy to me. And I knew right then and there that I was on the right track to regain my health.
How about you, Lierre?
I want to apologize for the background barking. We're having a coyote moment outside. And when the coyotes are here, the dogs, that's it. It's full on barkitude. So
dogs are always welcome on the show. Dogs are always welcome.
So yeah, my first bite, I had reached like serious desperation. It was a terrible thing. And a lot of my friends had already been through this. So I was kind of the last holdout in my friendship circle, where most of them had more or less already started eating meat again. And some of them didn't talk about it publicly, so I didn't know that. But some of them had talked about it, in our friendship. Like, we knew who was sort of slipping back, And a lot of them it's because they were doing serious athletic stuff, like they were doing karate. And I was like, believe me or not, Lierre, I can't do this eating vegan. Like, I just need to eat, some meat. And I didn't want to believe it, because of course you can't believe it. This can't be true. There has to be a way to do it right. And the thing is, in my life, I was not a junk food vegan. I know people who eat potato chips and Oreo cookies and call that vegan, which technically it is. But I was not that person. Like, I would not eat anything if there was white flour in it, if there was like white rice, not even white sugar. Like, if that was on the ingredient list, I just put it back on the shelf. I wasn't going to touch it. So everything was whole grain, happy, whatever. And I really meant it. I mean, it was like, I did not eat white sugar for 20 years. The joke is I was eating nothing but sugar. I just didn't know it. So anyway, no white sugar. Yeah. And so then at the end of it, I mean, I was so desperate. I was in so much physical pain from my spine. I basically spent my life lying on the couch. And it was, I mean, I couldn't even sit up for more than about 20 minutes at a time. I was in so much pain. And I stood up in like 30-second increments because it was just, the pain was horrendous. Yeah. So I went to see, there was a man who was a Qigong healer. It's a traditional Chinese medicine form. And I had had some pretty good experiences with acupuncture. And I had a lot of respect for Chinese medicine. It's an ancient, completely different, kind of healing system than we have in the West. Anyway, I went to see him and I did respect him. I thought he was, somebody with a lot of wisdom and clearly a lot of skill. So, I mean, he took one look at me and was like, this is just, you're in a very bad way, aren't you? Yeah, this is very bad. And he said, you have no chi in your body at all. There's nothing left. There's no energy. I was like, that pretty much is what it feels like. You're like just this corpse that can barely breathe. Breathing is an activity. Like that's how exhausted you are. And he was so kind though. He's like, well, what do you eat? Like, how did this happen to you? And I was like, oh, I'm a vegan and I don't. But at that point, I was already starting to cry because I knew what he was going to say. I knew he was going to say, you have to stop. It was like right there, like just about to break through into my consciousness. I could feel it coming. This is going to be the last day. And he's like, you can't do this. Like you're going to die if you keep this up. There's no way. This is not something humans can do. And then of course I did start crying, but he's like, do you have a religious, like, why? Why is this so hard for you? And I was like, because I don't want to hurt animals. That's like all I could think to say in that moment. But that was it. Like, I don't want to hurt the animals. And he's like, well, the big fish eat the little fish. Like, yeah, but I'm not a fish. I'm a human being, and I have I should be able to have an ethical framework where I'm picking my moral activities, and this doesn't feel moral to me. He's like, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's just reality, and you need to eat some meat. So, all right, well, we had the conversation. So I thought, all right, on the way home, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna be brave enough. I'm gonna try it. But it's the idea of actually having meat in my house was beyond horrifying. And I really understood in that moment, like the people with those who do have those really strict religious prescriptions, like, the Orthodox Jews who eat kosher and the Muslims who do the halal haram thing. Like I did not, it was unclean. Like just that word unclean, I got it. Like this is trafe. This is so bad. I don't want this in my house. So I bought a can of tuna fish because I wasn't going to have to put it on any of my dishes. And I could eat it with a plastic fork. I didn't actually have to cook it. So it wasn't going to touch my pans. All I had to do was open it. And I did. I had a plastic fork and I opened the can. I'm just going to eat it out of the can. That's how I'm going to do this. But it was like the longest, like 2 minutes of my life was like just holding that fork above that tin was like, I don't know how to do this. Everything's going to change. Who am I going to be? Who am I going to be if he's right? But the pain was so extreme. Like maybe I just have to try it. Maybe all my friends who have already, because my friends, like the ones who had already been through it, every once in a while would sit me down and have that loving conversation of just, I'm eating fish. I'm sorry to have to tell you this. You will feel better if you just try it. And I'd be like, no, I'm a vegan. No. So, I already had been like primed a little bit, like, all right, other people have been through this. They've lived through the experience. I see them all the time. They still look like nice people. They haven't sprouted horns. Like they're not torturing puppies in the basement. Like, so maybe I can find a way. So I did. I just took that bite and then it was just over. It was one bite and it was just done. Like even in my mouth, I could feel it all the way down my throat. It's just like that vibration of life energy. And I'm like, wow, I don't have to be a corpse. It was just the recharge. And then I did cry. Then I just lay on the couch and cried for half an hour because it was so bad. Like it was just rubble. Like, who was I? What did any of it mean? What was the meaning of the universe? Like what cosmos had I been dropped into that I was going to have to kill animals to survive? It was hard. It was a really hard, like 18 months, 2 years to come to grips with all of that. And then the ultimate joke of the whole thing was I was lying to myself being a vegan. We were all lying to each other. There are so many dead animals in vegan food. You're just looking at your plate going, oh, is there a dead face here? That's all that matters. You're not doing the math on all the entire ecosystems that have been destroyed for your food, the species that have been wiped out for your food. All of that is completely invisible when you're vegan. It's such a black and white world. And it's really the thinking of a small child. Like, okay, if it's in front of me, if it counts, object permanence, If it's not in front of me, it doesn't count. That's all I did for 20 years. So it was a very, very hard thing, and also had to be done. I mean, I'm better for it, but it's a hard moment. And so when they write to me and say, I think I have to do this, it's, I sort of hold their hands over email or whatever. Like, I know it is one of the hardest things you're ever going to do is take that first bite, but you have to try it and you will feel better.
Wow. Well, you mentioned earlier that you have to be ready to hear this message. And I suck at this. I don't know how many times I have to learn that, like, the Costco person that's checking off my receipt does not want me to say, like, hey, check it out, no plants were harmed in the shopping of this trip to Costco. Like, they don't care. Like, somebody was asking me a few days ago, they're doing a kind of an informal study on different diets, and he wants to collect some blood, and he was talking about, like, he was giving me an informal food frequency questionnaire. He was like, how many times do you eat fruit? I'm like, 0. How many times do you eat vegetables? I'm like, 0. He's like, 0? And like, are you really constipated? I'm like, no, actually not that constipated. And then, of course, we're done with the conversation. I sent him like 17 texts about how great carnivore is, which he's not open to. And like, I can't help myself. I don't know how many times I need to learn, but you guys are pros at this. You do have people reaching out to you who are at that stage where they're at least considering it. So how are you? You've already alluded to some of the things you do and how you hold their hands and say that things are okay. What practical things do you come up against for somebody that may be listening, that might be in that spot of, like, maybe they're considering coming out of it? How are you coaching people out of that situation?
Casey, this is a great question. And first of all, well, and I'm sure Lierre, I don't think she was following me at that point on my X Twitter account, but well, Casey, that when I first came onto X and extolled the virtues of eating animal products after being a vegan for so long and showing my before and after pictures, how I was just bombarded with vegan hate. It was pretty crazy. And even you had to chime in. Jane Buxton even came to my defense. I was so chuffed at that. I mean, it was great. But I try and lead by example first off. And I know full well what it can be like when you leave the rank and file of a vegan and start eating animal foods again, how it can be. In Lierre use the word cult-like, and they really shun you and really publicly humiliate people that come out and say they feel better with adding animal foods back in. And so I did not try and go for the attack back on those folks. I'm sure you noticed. I just said, I am not lying. This is exactly what happened. These are actual photos. This is a true account. If you need to speak to people that have been living with me, you can. And I just let people come to me. And I think all of our approach has been one of kindness. And I started my podcast just to help people not go down the same road that I did, if there's any way. And so what I like to do is, again, special thanks to Sally Norton, I realized that I had been bombing myself with the highest oxalate vegetables, not only just vegan diet, but the highest oxalate ones there could be. I'm talking beetroot juicing, chia seeds that basically ripped a hole in my intestines, caused me to bleed for almost 3 days straight in the hospital. And so if I can, I at least tell people to lower their oxalate vegetables first. At the same time, by saying, you might want to consider adding some animal foods back in, because I know this will be coming. I just have to work with them. They might say, I'm not at that stage yet, and that's fine. James, I heard your podcast with Sally and Monique Attinger on oxalates, and I'm thinking that will help me in some way. And I tell them, absolutely. One of the first things I did from listening to Sally was lower my high toxic vegetables, or at least try and get some of these phyto stuff out of them, like lectins, and can boil. Are you boiling things? Are you trying to at least not eat things raw? And as they start to feel better, they're like, well, I didn't think this was possible. Can I add, do you think I should try animal foods? And if so, how? I asked them, well, what are you leaning towards? What is your internal dialogue saying to you? Where would you like to go? There's no right or wrong with this, but again, going back to what Lierre and I have been through, if you've been eating the high oxalate vegetables, if you've been a vegan for a long time, you do have to take into account that your stomach acid and enzyme production is quite low. And I learned that early on, Casey. I had to, I thought, wow, this fish is going really well. I'm going to slap a ribeye on the grill and see what happens. Oh man, did it hurt. I didn't have the stomach acid to be able to break it down. And I was so confused as to what was going on, because people were saying it's so easy to absorb, but I felt like a lead weight had hit me because it wasn't digesting properly. So then I dove into digestion. And then, of course, I came across Lierre and on Boundless Body Radio, the first episode you two did together. And she talked about it. I was like, huh, that makes sense. And so I really try and guide them from a nutritional perspective and say, okay, let's take baby steps here. You don't want to go gung ho. And I'll tell you, I went gung ho, as you know, afterwards once I figured out the betaine issue. But also, as again, thank you, Sally Norton and Monique Attinger, we know that oxalates can be stored. And once you stop ingesting them, they can come out and it can be just as painful as them going in. So I have to really guide folks on that oxalate issue too, and the plant toxin issue as they come out of that vegan space. It's a very important nuance that a lot of people reach out to me on. And I'll let Lierre speak now.
It kind of depends. I have to sort of fine tune it to the person. A lot of times the real sticking point is, of course, the moral issue, because they are just, I can't kill animals. I can't kill animals. So that's a whole different conversation about there is literally nothing you can eat that does not involve dead animals. And I will walk you through this as many times as you need. The real question is your food destroying the cycle of life, or is it a part of the cycle of life? So is it making that cycle stronger? And if you're eating vegan food, that's mostly going to be the stuff that's destroying the planet. This is like, nobody tells them this, but this is what agriculture is, literally what it is. You take a piece of land and you clear all the life off it, and then you plant it just for humans, little annual grains. That's what we got. So that's its mass extinction, and it destroys the topsoil, and it was the beginning of global warming, and you're wrecking the water table, and like on and on and on. So nothing that you think you're doing is what you're doing. This is actually the worst possible thing you could be doing for animals. And also the amount of animals that are just dead in the food. I have never been, on a farm when the harvesting of the grain was happening. I've never seen that. I've never lived in the Midwest really, but I have talked to people who had that life when they were younger. They, were the person who drove that tractor and that combine, and they all had the same story. That last acre of wheat or corn or whatever you're growing is horrendous, because all of the small mammals that have tried to live inside that field have nowhere else to go. They have been, everything's been cleared. It's nothing but dry stubble behind them. And now you're at that last acre, and it's just a bloodbath behind the machine, because the birds, the mice, whatever, the rats, the snakes, everything that is now terrified inside that last acre, you have to kill them. And they know it and they hate it. This is the word, you just dread that last acre because you know what's happening. That's what's in your food. That is what is dying so that you can have that corn or that wheat or that wonderful, whatever, vegan soy. It's mass death everywhere you look. So it's things that we don't like to talk about because they're painful and scary and very disturbing, but that's what it is. That's what vegan food is. So I can have that conversation with them. And then I talk about the food that actually repairs the world. But it's a hard moment to have to accept that there's nothing you can do. As they say, once you take birth as a Buddhist, once you're here in a body, things are going to have to die to feed you. And then we can talk about plant sentient and the kinds of amazing things that plants do to communicate with each other and help each other and build community together. And I live here in the redwoods. We actually have albino redwoods. So they're missing, I don't know, some chemical, but they're not green. They look this sort of weird grayish white color. They can't photosynthesize. They can't make chlorophyll for whatever reason. And they're alive. So you might wonder, well, how are they getting any food? How are they doing this? That's what plants do, is they take the sunlight and they turn it into, and they can't do it. So the reason they're alive is because all of their mother sister plants around them keep them alive. They send them nutrition through their roots. So that's where all their energy is coming from, is that all the other trees around them say, you're one of us. We're going to, just like we would with someone sick or whatever. Here we go with the barking. Sorry. Anyway, plants do that for each other because they know each other and they love each other and they make a community together and they're related. They're literally the sisters and the mothers of each other. So that's what they're doing. So, there's all kinds of things we can say about plant sentience, but that is my best example. They are choosing to use some of their energy to keep their friends alive, just like we do as humans. So that can help. And you have to mull this over. No one's going to change their minds in 2 hours. when it's this sort of a really profound ethical dilemma, it takes time and a lot of reading and a lot of information. And I always say to them, like, go to a farm, try to grow your own. You'll see what I'm talking about. Surely someone in your family has a garden. Go talk to them about how much they have to kill to make the lettuce happen. I've certainly had my own stories about that. So that is one thing. If it's their health that's absolutely collapsed on them, the first advice I will give them is to take out all the soy. The second advice is take out all of the industrial seed oils, the canola. Please, dear God, never touch that stuff again. The corn, the whatever oil they're eating, don't touch it. The only oil, the only fat you should be eating at this point is coconut oil. That is at least an appropriate fat for humans. Until you can just kind of make your way around to eating some actual animal fats. Like, take out all of that and then try to add some coconut oil. And sometimes they'll feel a little better just on that. Like, their brains will feel a little bit better from the coconut oil. But it's only a matter of time. Like, they've really just got to come around the whole way. It's really not until they eat that first bit of meat. The eggs will help, the butter will help. All of those, you will feel a little bit better. It's just not the same as a chunk of meat, though. And it's inevitable. If they've reached the point where their health is collapsing, there's no way back. You're just going to have to eat a lot of meat for a long time. So yeah, it's just a process. And my sister once said to me, the problem is, like, you're the first one through the door. You're the one that's going to get shot. And I try to remember that. It's like, yeah, right. I might just be dropping this information and nothing happens for 2 years. And that's okay, because there's other people to catch them. Like, all right, I gave them some information. It made a lot of confusion and some bad emotions have now arisen. They can't quite deal. It's going to be back and forth for a while. There's a zigzag. And then they'll find a podcast, or they'll find another really good book, or they'll watch Sacred Cow or The Magic Pill, or one of the really good documentaries that we have out now. And, there'll be more information they're able to absorb. So it's like thinking of it as a process. It's not just one conversation. This is going to be a year or two.
100%. And Casey, I wanted to add that piggybacking off Lierre's explanation there, and absolutely, if it comes from, and I talked to highlighted about the nutritional side, the moral side, absolutely. And by the time most folks find me with a podcast named Carnivorist Chats and seeing that, they've considered, they've molded over, they've heard the stories, they may even have read Lierre's book. But without fail, I can tell you, every single person that's come to me, I send them your long form podcast, Casey, and still do to this day, that you did with Lierre, myself, Dr. Chafee, called Vegans Returning from Malnutrition. And I send that to them and say, just listen to other examples like myself. There's a whole host of you hosted ex-vegans there. And then Lierre's expertise, Dr. Chafee's expertise, Jane Buxton's on there. And without fail, they always come back to me and say, thank you for sending that to me. It resonated with me so much because I heard similar examples of what I am going through now. My hair's falling out. I want it to stop. What can I do? I've got gastroparesis. Like Lierre, I've done damage to my spine. I need to know I'm not alone in this, because I feel alone now. And all the support that I had is gone now that I'm considering this. What say you? And I send them that. And then I tell them to read Lierre's wonderful book, of course, too, and Sacred Cow. But yeah, just to piggyback off that.
Well,
yeah,
thank
the
you
other
so much.
thing, there's one more thing too that sometimes really you have to emphasize with them, is that they're going to lose their friends and they're terrified. And it's really hard. And what I say to them is, you can make new friends, you can't get a new body. You're already suffering, right? You've already done this damage and it's only going to get worse. And you know that. That's why you're reaching out. You've run the experiment into the ground. Your knees hurt all the time. You're only 28 years old. Your joints shouldn't be hurting. You can't get pregnant, like on and on. I know what you're going through. And yeah, your friends will hate you. You just have to accept it and move on. There are many, many good people out in the world who aren't in this cult. And you can get out and you can find them, and you can, remember your old friend, remember the people that you cut out of your life when you went vegan. Go back, find those people again. And there's other people. In a few years, this will be a hard thing that you went through, but it will be over, and you'll have support and love, and you'll have that new community. But it is a bad moment, and I want to recognize that for you. It is a bad moment when you lose all your friends, and they're going to yell at you. Block them if you have to. You don't need abuse in your life. You do not need this level of abuse. Don't do it. Get off social media for a while if you have to. It's not worth it. So that's like the other piece of it, is that the friendship thing is really hard.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That was going to be my last question, actually, is like, how do you help provide people with hope when it is, Lierre, you described it perfectly, that moment of like, this is me, this is my identity, this is my ego who am I going to be? I've been this for so long. These are all my friends and all the communities I'm on social media and in person. Are there any other ways you try to like really help people understand that, like, yeah, this is going to suck for a little while and you might lose a few people who you thought were friends who actually might not be friends? Like, are there any other ways you provide hope for those people?
I think just trying to emphasize that there's a bigger world out here, and there really are such wonderful people in the world. And it's most of them aren't in this little tiny community that you know. Like, it's so small. You've made your world really small, and it will open out again. So just talk to people, like just cultivate new friends, and you'll find them. And there's a whole community of us out here who already tried it, and we are here to help you and support you. We know exactly how bad you're going to feel for the next year or two. And it's going to be hard, and you're going to have to rebuild like your whole framework. You have to start from square one. And it's hard because it's almost like a spiritual collapse. For me, it was like, I don't know my place in the cosmos. That's how bad it was. It wasn't even like, well, what am I going to eat? Who am I going to talk to? It was like way bigger. It was like, I don't want to. My sister was like, you want God to be a just God. That's your problem. I'm like, yeah, I do. I want to live in a universe where I don't have to kill animals. I was like, that's not the reality that we're offered on this planet. So it was a whole different world of just, so what does it mean as a spiritual being then? How do I make peace with the fact that death is always in life, that it's the same moment, that for one thing to survive, the other thing is going to die. And it's still hard for me. I look out the window every day. I have these beautiful little spider webs in the corners of my windows. And I love having the spiders. I love living a country life. I love, the trees and the bunny rabbits and the hawks and the coyotes, even when they scream. I got mountain lions on my land. It's pretty cool. But the spiders are part of it. They're literally the web of life. That's why we use that metaphor. But they eat things. And there's always these 5-10 minute horrible sections where something gets caught in the web and I hear it buzzing for help and it's frantically trying to get loose and I cannot intervene. If I save that creature, it means the spider will starve to death. So there's one or the other is going to live. And we need spiders in the world. And spiders have evolved to do this. Clearly, it's part of the balance. I can't take their food away. Like, what right do I have to kill the spider? I can't pretend the spider's not going to die. But it's really hard. So that was like the cosmic collapse. And I think some of these people are really going through that, where it's like, I don't understand the universe. I'm like, yeah, neither did I. So it's a whole new world. So just to emphasize, it's going to take time. You will find really good people who have been through this. Here's some good resources to find those people, some podcasts and some support groups online and some Facebook groups, and find the ones that work for you. But it just to acknowledge them, that this is the hardest thing I ever had to do personally. And I've been through some hard stuff. We all have. But this one was like nothing else. This was the massive collapse. It was like my personal 9/11 where it just, boom, it was over, and then everything's different. And it was like that. So I just acknowledge this is really hard for you. I know that. It will be better in a year or two. This, I promise. Things will be so much better. And you'll have a whole different world and things will make sense again. And it will be beautiful again. It will be more real, but it will be beautiful. You will see the beauty in this once you come around to it, but it is hard. So just telling them that, just that acknowledgement that this sucks, I think goes a long way.
Yeah. Oh, that is so great. And I owe so much to you, Lierre, and to you, Casey, because as you know, mine is recent and I can just relive the emotions going through it again. I just try and tell people, Casey, that you're going to go through some stages. Lierre went through it. I went through it. My first stage, after going down the rabbit hole and listening to Lierre and realizing, and I'm sure you were the same way, Casey, about how we've been misled on so many levels, from the dietary guidelines, from listening to Nina Teicholz and her big fat surprise and how stuff was kept from us on purpose. There will be some anger. And I was really angry. I was angry about how I could have been misled on so many things, how I fell victim to propaganda, how it impacted so much of my life through the ability for many stages to not have children, for example. I've talked about this openly at KetoCon. I wanted kids, but I could not physically have them because of my dietary choices. The fact that I nearly killed myself thinking I was doing all the right things. I lost jobs, I lost friends. And I just tell people to, when faced with the choice, and as you start discovering things, as Lierre says, you will build a whole new identity. You're still there, but it's a more open, intuitive, truer self, because you've realized you're going down this road together with like-minded people once you've discovered this, and it can be a truly amazing cathartic experience. I remember continuing to shed tears because of all the hurt that I had been through and what the pain that I caused myself. I mean, even today, I was getting a little choked up earlier telling the story. I mean, I didn't get a chance to today of telling when I hit rock bottom and I went out on my little moped here in Bermuda, and I didn't have the strength to hold it up, so it fell over on me, and I had to get someone to come pick it up off me. And I often cry telling that story because there I was, 127 pounds. I had literally just come from the doctor's office, and I wanted to go for a drive, and I couldn't because I was too weak. And so I tell people, if you've reached this stage, just know that you're going to, as Lierre says, you're going to go through some changes. It's going to take a couple of years. You're going to have to tweak some things. I certainly tweaked some things. I went full bore into carnivore after. I was like, right, plants are out. They cause me so much harm. I am going full carnivore. And even then I had to slow down. My body wasn't ready for it. You just have to take this journey slowly, embrace the knowledge, embrace the new you, and good things will be sure to follow.
Wow. Well, that is so beautiful. I so admire you both for your stories. James, this episode again was your idea. Is there anything else you want to add to this, or should we wrap it up here?
I just want to say again, thank you to you both. From a personal standpoint, I would not literally be here today if it was not for the both of you. Your Boundless Body, Casey, was such an integral part of my journey. I encourage everybody to go back and listen to every episode. What I appreciate about you and Lierre is there is no dogma. Lierre and I left that behind. I left a world filled with dogma. If you weren't doing it right, you were, that was it. You're out. You need to go harder, do this. And I just want to say thank you, and thank you for your presence, continuing to do what you're doing. This coming together today is honestly a dream come true for me to have these conversations and continue hoping to help people. That's why we're here. So thank you for everything, both of you.
Thank you so much, James, for the kind words. Lierre, anything you'd like to add?
A lot is possible, and if you reach that kind of rock bottom like James is describing, which I'd never heard that story. It's very profound, and I'm really sorry you had to go through that. It's like got me kind of teared up here. It's a horrible story. You may be at that state now where you've just had enough, and you can't go on, but you don't know what comes next, and you're jumping off a cliff. And there's people here who will help you find your wings.
Excellent.
You can do it. It's hard, but it's like I'm going to start crying. We are here for you because we've been there, and we know how hard it is, and the kinds of things, that the information you're going to need, and what it takes to kind of put yourself back together. But your body can also heal a lot. Some of it, may be permanent. In my case, some of it was permanent, but a lot of it got better too. And when I went carnivore, I completely cured my psoriatic arthritis. So, it's just this miracle, because I was going to have to go on a biologic, and I'm still amazed that I didn't have to do that. I got to duck right under that one, and nothing hurts anymore. My fingers are fine. That was horrible pain too. It's like little jabbing needles. Like, it's a really nasty pain, that psoriatic pain. So I'm like, the miracles, they keep rolling in. So, you'll find your wings, and we're here to help.
Oh. You guys are both amazing. I'm so fortunate to know both of you. I think you're both beautiful souls, and I love you both so very much. So grateful for taking the time to come on our show today. James, let's start with you. Where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Oh, thank you again, Casey. Yeah, I am at _Carnivorist with a T on all my socials. I'm on Instagram. I am on X, otherwise known as Twitter. I am on YouTube at the same handle, and you can find me on all your places that you love to enjoy listening to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and a few others. But that's where you can find me.
Excellent. We will link that below. Lierre, where can people find you as well?
I have a website, lierrekeith.com, and I make that sound like it's easy. It's not. I have this really weird name. But the best thing you can do, if you don't have a pen and paper in front of you, is look for Vegetarian Myth, because there's only one book with that title, and I wrote it. So if you Google that, you'll find the rest of me. So I'm on Facebook and I'm on Twitter, and you're happy to follow me or friend me or do whatever thing is on the. I'm not on any of the others. I can't do one more thing, but those two for sure I'm on, so you can find me.
I'm glad you're at least on those so we can see your amazing experiences with your massive dogs in your house and trying to like move around them in the kitchen where they're all napping is so adorable.
And I'm really sorry for all the barking today. It was coyotes. Of course, it had to happen while we were interviewing, but
exactly.
They're out there, they're screaming, so we've got.
All good. Like I said, dogs are always welcome on our show. And so are you two as well. Thank you so very much for taking the time to come on our show today, James and Lierre. So much appreciate you and your work and your willingness to share some difficult and sometimes painful moments, but moments that can really help a lot of people out there who are suffering. And I know you've changed a lot of lives, and that's very, very meaningful. So thank you again for your work, and thank you for taking time to be on our show today. We really appreciate you both.
Thanks a million, Casey. It's been an honor.
Thank you guys so much.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Carnivorist Chats. If you've made it this far, I want to say thank you for listening, and also thank you in advance for liking, subscribing, or sharing this episode. Thanks again to Equip Foods, Carnivore Snacks, and the Carnivore Bar. Don't forget to check the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products. Until the next time, be well,